Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today we're going to talk about land survey. Wednesday was my last day at CVS, my last official day. I put in the 2 weeks ago, as I mentioned, and so that was it. Good, glad to get away from there. Said goodbye to my coworkers. My coworkers were good people, but the company was just always very strange. Actually, I've got news about that. Speaking of companies having the corporate higher-ups be in control of everything, legally speaking, it turns out because of the way a lot of these kinds of companies operate, like McDonald's and everything, they operate through franchises. And I don't believe this is how CVS works. I think CVS has a different structure, but I know that McDonald's operates by franchises. And anyway, the way that the franchise thing works is that McDonald's technically considers themselves not responsible for their workers. So when their workers get mistreated or they're underpaid, or McDonald's says, hey, work these guys to death, and then people get worked to death, then McDonald's is legally not liable. They can make those demands, and then the franchise holder can comply, or they get punished by McDonald's or whatever. And so for the longest time, this has kind of been a thing, and it's been more of an issue since a lot of companies have started to cut back on employment and wages and healthcare options and everything else. And anyway, though, there was a recent court case. I can't remember who got caught up in this. It might have been McDonald's, but they had a big court case where they came out and they said, like, look, you determine the employee training and what they're going to wear and their hours and how much they're going to be paid and everything else. Like, you're pretty much in complete control of these people from the top down. So from now on, you're going to be responsible. You're considered responsible to your employees. This is kind of a big deal because it sets a huge precedent. Except the problem is that because the lawsuit set a big precedent, now just about every big major industry figure has run down to the courts to contest this court thing. They're all throwing money behind it, trying to get it shoved away. So interesting news. We'll see how that turns out. It's hard to say. A lot of people are very cynical these days with politics, with the way that things have been going, with all the gridlock and everything. Just very, very unusual. And there's partisanship within the court system as well. So, like I say, when the biggest players in the country all show up to fight a labor ruling, you never know how it's going to turn out. But some interesting news to keep an eye on. But anyway, like I say, today I'm going to talk about land survey. I just figured I would open up with a little bit of work. Land survey, I've spoken fondly about it in the past, and I should say it's a job that I do kind of think back on fondly. But it had ups and downs because land survey, it's a very salt of the earth kind of job, and I don't know. It's going in a new direction. Back in the day, like, land survey used to be a big deal. A lot of people used to be land surveyors. James Cook was actually a surveyor. You had to know how to navigate, how to draw maps, how to know where you are. So James Cook, he would go places, and then based on the stars, he would draw out his maps and name places and say, this is what I found, this is what it looks like, you know, I'm James Cook and I'm a famous explorer. And it used to be a big deal because you had to know a lot of calculus to do your trigonometry. You had to know how to calculate sine, you know, tangent, cosine, without a calculator, which is something that we don't teach until, like, you know, I can't remember when I learned this, but it was like calculus. You can use like a Taylor series equation to get your sine, cosine, stuff like that. Yeah, you didn't used to have calculators, and this was just a generation ago that this was still the case. Abraham Lincoln was actually a land surveyor. And so you required a lot of specialized math skills to be able to do the job, and then you also had to have the willingness to go out in the woods and then, like, measure out a bunch of stuff out in the woods with, like, a chain or whatever tools were at your disposal for the particular job. And you had to brave like wild dogs and raccoons and, like, angry people with shotguns and everything else. It was one of those jobs that it didn't attract a huge swath of people, and it couldn't attract a huge swath of people because you had to be smart and you had to be willing to go out and traipse around in the waterways and stuff like that. So a very fraternal kind of business back in the day. It's getting to be less so, though, as I discovered. There's still quite a number of independent land surveyor companies out there. There's, like, they're run by like one or two guys who have a lot of land survey experience. But like a lot of things anymore, they're starting to get gobbled up by big oligopolies, or they're going under. Because what's happening is, as technology progresses, we now don't need I mean, like, we can use computers to do the calculus for a lot of the work. And in fact, a lot of work in land survey now, instead of drawing out maps and having all these like physical copies of everything, you can now draw out 3D maps and a variety of programs. AutoCAD is an option, just for like an example. There's a couple of them, but it's all much more complex than it used to be, and a lot more of the computations are handled by computers. So it's gotten to where now more of the job that I did, I was actually a field crewman. I was not an official land surveyor. I didn't have the credentials. You can get them now, and from what I understand, it's a lot easier to become a licensed land surveyor, at least in certain states, than it used to be because of the lesser requirements to doing many aspects of the job. And I had an interesting thing. Land survey is a great job because you get all over your state. I mean, anywhere, like the land surveyors, because they used to know each other, they kind of work, a lot of them sort of work in certain territories, and they don't really step into each other's territories. And of course, you also used to build up a lot of contacts, and so you would know so-and-so with the water department, and then you would know this guy, and you'd know that guy. And they would do repeat hires, and, you know, you really didn't, there's not a whole lot of competition, at least in my area. Not until, like, the big corporate guys come in. The big corporate guys don't care about, you know, any of that. They'll kind of go wherever they want to go. Big corporate's scary. Yes. Anyway, so yeah, so you get around your little sphere, your little hub of influence, and for me it was kind of like, I live on the border of my state, so I would go, like, you know, across the border every now and then, and do stuff out there, out to the colleges. I went to the zoo once, and then mapped out the zoo, the seal pit, actually. Well, the region by the seal pit. And anyway, so yeah, so you get to go to all kinds of really interesting places, and you meet a lot of interesting people from a variety of walks of life. And you also meet people who are just outright crazy, because you go to, like, really, you go all over. Like, you go to good neighborhoods, you go to bad neighborhoods. Everybody needs land survey every now and then, whether you know it or not. Because every single property that you live on, they're marked out on your maps, and most of them have ways to designate, like, how big is your property, like, how far out do things go. They have, like, rods buried underground, and so if you go out there with a metal detector, you can find the rod, you can dig it up, and you say, ah, there it is, there's the corner of my property, or something to that effect. You might have, like a broader pin somewhere, and it kind of maps out, and so, like, if you get the maps, you'll find, like, here's this pin, and then you can map to this other pin, and then you can find the boundaries of everything that way. So everything, the whole city, everywhere that everybody lives, are mapped out by these things that are buried in the ground, or they're set in the sidewalk or the concrete. You can find monuments, actually, if you're walking around downtown. This is especially true in, like, big cities like Europe. Kenza and I found them all over Berlin when I went out to go see her there. This became a thing. It was really cute, because we'd walk around, and I taught her to look for the monuments. And then like, we would look for them. It became a game. Like, we would look for them all over the place and get really excited when we found them. And so that was good fun. But they're like little domes, kind of. And they'll have a little indentation. And the reason why they have an indentation is so you can set a tool there inside of them and then measure with the tool or from the tool, or you can set up a device, and it'll be centered over the tool, and if you center up your device correctly, then you know your coordinates where your device is set up. So yeah, those are all over the city. You'll find those all over the place, and the land surveyors keep track of where those are, and they use them to map out the area. And you need to do this because stuff moves. I mean, like, things collapse, you have stuff that gets washed away in floods, like earthquakes, this, that, there's all kinds of things. Over the span of, like, 40 years, you could be surprised how much an area might move. And so you go out there, and then you find that these pins have been uprooted, and so a land surveyor can set new pins and make sure that everything stays pretty much right where it's supposed to, and nobody loses or gains land. And in fact, this is part of the job, is you'll get hired by the city very often to go out and say, like, okay, we want to expand the highway, so tell us if we're going to demolish anybody's house. And so you go down and you have a look, and you try to figure out who owns what properties, and so then you report back to the city, and you say, okay, if you expand this far out, you're going to be moving into people's private homes, and so just be aware of that. And then the city decides to do what to do with that knowledge. Other times you kind of go out and you just explain, like, you know, we don't really have like, our maps are very confusing. We got this sometimes they look at areas, and this is especially true of areas that are like low income, because the city tends to ignore low income housing. It's just one of those tragedies where it's like, if there's not very many taxes coming in, then they're kind of like, oh well, we'll not, we don't want to really spend our money. There's no money coming in from this low income housing area, so we won't put any money into it. So what you'll find is that those areas get updated a lot less frequently, and so we actually had one job. It was huge, where we mapped out this entire like low income residential area, and there was like stray dogs. I mean, we went down there, and I'm pretty sure I can tell you like where the whorehouse is and like where to buy illegal pot. I mean, like, I couldn't confirm it. It's one of those, it's strange because you're poking around all over the town, and you're like walking around, you're like in the backyard, and you just find stuff and it like looks suspicious, but you don't want to ask any questions because you're going to be there for like maybe a month for like a really big project, maybe like two. I think we were doing this project for like 2 months. I don't know. It ran over because we kept finding stuff, weird civil like anomalies. And then we'd go back and we'd report to the engineers and we'd say, so, yes, it turns out that the sewer folds in on itself and forms a perfect circle that leads into the abyss. And if you go down any further, then the devil's, he beckons to you and you have to... So we'd report this stuff and, like, the engineers would be like, no, we didn't build satanic symbols below this low-income housing area. Yeah, prove it. And so we go down there with like cameras and we take snapshots and be like, there he is, there's the devil. And then, and so the engineers would be like, oh, wow, man, what were they thinking 40 years ago? So that's about how that works. But yes, jobs, I did a variety of jobs. I only worked there for a year, but like I said, I did a variety of jobs. One of the more interesting ones was the airport job, and I can't tell you guys a whole lot of the specifics in terms of what I had to do, because it would be illegal. We had to go through a lot of the security stuff, so I can't tell you guys about the security things. But I had to learn military call signs. I actually worked on both the downtown airport and the international airport. And I can say it's a lot more relaxed. Like, if I was going to get a job, like if any of you guys are interested in getting a job, like working with planes at an airport, if you can get a job like downtown, maybe it doesn't pay very much like your little airport, but that was so much more relaxed. I mean, we'd be driving around, and the only time things got serious was when a plane crashed. We had a Cessna come in, and Cessnas are like little planes, and so it was, I can't remember if it was a very experienced pilot or just something happened, the landing gear got stuck, and so they tried to make a landing on the landing gear that was stuck, and the gear didn't turn, so when they landed, they turned off the runway. And they were okay, there was no fatalities, it's just that it was a little plane, and it had a mechanical failure, and then it didn't, like the plane got thrashed, but the people inside it were okay. So, yes, that was the only time it got really serious, and they were like, no, we are serious now, you guys go home. But yeah, the international airport though was very hectic. They were very strict. Once or twice we interfered with equipment that we weren't supposed to, and this is just because the international airport has a lot of really delicate equipment. So we got within range of some stuff to map it out and like to show like, here's this thing and here's this thing and here's this thing, because what you have is these rods, and then you have like a camera, and it's not really a camera. What it does is it just kind of like looks for the rod, and then it like takes it calculates the distance from the camera to the rod, and then it just stores that distance, that data. And so then later when you take it home and put it in the computer, it shows you like, here I was and here's that. And so you draw out like a nice three-dimensional map that way. It's kind of neat. It doesn't take any physical pictures, but that's the best way I can describe it, is it's like a camera. So we do that, is we'd have like the camera set up, and then we go out there to like these devices, and we thought they were off because this is one of those, like, we're going to be shutting down the runways because we don't want to land planes on you guys while you're doing land survey on the runway. One thing that astounded me though was the fact that they were like, yeah, you guys need to map out the runway, but we want you to map out with like, I mean, like, give or take 10 feet. which in land survey is one of those things, like when you mark out somebody's house, like people are like, give or take like 1/10 of a foot, please. But then like the airport was like, give or take, I don't know, 10 feet on the runway. We should be good. They probably had more accurate stuff for that. I don't know how they get their altitudes. A little bit scary if they use us, if you think about it. Just like, I don't know, I mean, the plane will come down like just vaguely. I mean, where's the plane gonna go? Down. So yes, That was a bit shocking. But there's actually monuments at the end of the runways. This is kind of fun. This is something I learned, is that at your local airport, you may very well have land survey monuments on either side of the runways. So that way everybody knows, here's where the runway starts, here's where the runway ends. It's all in the database, it's in the maps, and so on and so forth. Yes. But anyway, like I said, I've met people from all walks of life. I've met airport operators, I've met zoo people. Mostly they just talk about, like, here's what we want you to do, or they come out and they say, how are things going? But every now and then we got people who would want to come out and talk to us, because you'd be poking around, like, in their yard or by their yard or like across the street from their yard, and they would come out and they would just say, what are you guys doing? The worst places that I went to were places that were like really isolated. Like, there would be like it'd be like a low income area, and but it would be kind of like out in the woods, sort of, and everything would be really isolated, and so the people weren't like used to seeing people on their property. I once had a guy who had like 6 Saint Bernards or something like that, just great big dogs. Like, if you've never seen a Saint Bernard, they're huge, just enormous animals. And so we were out there doing our jobs, and he just like lets them out, and he just and they came right towards us. Oh, got a text. They came right towards us. Luckily, they were friendly. But just, you get weird things like that, just like stuns. Like, I guess he just let them out to scare us. But one time I was doing survey, and this was actually in a more packed-in area. There was a lot more people. And I remember this racist little old man came out to me, and he was like, I was stuck behind the camera. And so he walks up behind me, he goes, oh, guys, you're doing land survey, are you? And I told him, yes, sir, yep, we're doing land survey. And he's like, what for? And I'm like, well, you know, we're looking at the sewer systems today, so we're thinking about maybe we're gonna, they might fix up the sewer system. Some of them are kind of clogged up, and they're acting up. And he goes, oh, okay, you know, I set up markers in my own yard. I keep them really well maintained. And I was like, that's good, that'll make our job easier. And he goes, yeah, I keep them under, and this is, like, I'm hesitant to do this, but just to paraphrase, he goes, yeah, I keep them under nigger heads. And I go, oh, okay. And he goes, you know why they call them that, right? And I go, no, sir. I can't remember. I think I just gave him a look. Like, I was just like, no, I mean, I'm sure there's some quirky reason. Because you think about, like, back in H.P. Lovecraft, there was a cat, and the cat was named Nigger Man. And that's because it was a black cat. And so, like, Lovecraft, I guess he thought that was charming at the time. I mean, it was racist. Like, in retrospect, you know, so I thought, like, maybe this little old guy, maybe he was a nice guy and he just thought he was being charming and he was gonna make a cute joke. But no, he goes because black people have heads like rocks. And I was just like, oh, okay, sir. And like I say, it's a job where, like, you don't, I mean, like, I ran into some stuff that, some of it may be a little heavy for the fact that, I mean, like, I ran into a guy who confessed that he was growing marijuana crops in his cornfields. Like, or he didn't really, he didn't confess, he just kind of, like, you could construe, like, he just told us he was, but the crops had been harvested, so there was no, like, proof or evidence. And it was, like, just like, some guy on one of the, like, 20 farms that we'd been hired to do this, like, thing on. Like, I don't even really recall where it was because we were just driving all over the place. And it was like, you knock on a door and you'd be like, hey, sir, we need to do some land survey in your farm. Just let you be aware we're going to be out there. And we do that as a courtesy because in some states, like, land surveyors don't even actually have to ask for permission. You can actually just go into people's property and you can do your survey thing, and that's legal. It's not trespassing. But you usually ask permission anyway, just to let people be aware, hey, we're land surveyors, don't shoot us. Because in states where you have like a castle law, like don't come into my home where I can kill you law, you don't want people to assume that they can kill you, because that's just a legal fiasco for everyone. You get killed, and then it turns out they didn't have the right to do it, and you know, yeah, this is not good. So you don't really like talk back to these people when people come out and they're like, yeah, we're doing illegal whoring or something like that. You're just like, I'll just assume you're joking, sir, because you have to come back for like 2 months or whatever. Like I say, you're coming back every day, and you see these guys again, and it's like one of those things. Like, and then the other thing that'll happen sometimes is you'll take pictures of an area, and then the engineers will be like they'll be like, go back, can you look at this again? And this will be like way later in the project. Like, this will be like as they're starting to do construction, So you could do that sort of thing. You could be like, oh yeah, this guy told us that at one point he was doing this thing, and then like the FBI could be out there or the cops could go talk to him. But then what would happen was that like in a couple of months later when you come back, like sure enough, they would be pissed because they know that you were poking around and then the cops showed up. So it's just like I say, like unless you saw something really blatantly terrible, like there was proof. Like I said, the guy who was like, I grow marijuana. And we were just like, okay, well, as long as it's not out here, you know, like, we're just, you know, like, sir, we don't really need to know this information. Yeah. So this guy came out, and this is what he told me. He spent the next, like, hour talking to me about just his racist crap that he's like, you know what's wrong with the world today? And he started to just go on about, you know, things, and I can't remember. It was all just like really typical old man stuff, but very racist, like lots of racist overtone old man stuff. And I was a captive audience, and this man knew it, so I spent the full hour just listening to him tell me all this racist crap. And little did he realize, though, I mean, like, he would tell me this stuff, and he was so misguided. Like, he really didn't know about any of the stuff he was talking about. Because he would talk about, like, you know, black culture and this and that. And what he maybe didn't realize was that, like, the very next day, I was going to, like, the low-income, like, because there are places that are, I mean, as unfortunate as it is, there are places that are segregated by race. And so I would go to the low-income areas with a lot of black people in them, and it was the same thing. It was the same thing as the areas that were predominantly white. No difference. No matter where you went, you would hear people on, like, if it was low-income housing, if it was a rough area, you would find people who were doing the same things wrong, who were talking about, like, shootings, you know, they'd be like, oh, I heard there was a shooting out on the street corner, stuff like that. We had, like, bus drivers that were talking about that, you know, like, on their break, picking up kids, I remember that. Yeah, there was really, I mean, like, there was, like, no difference, but they just kind of lived in their own, this little guy just lived in his own little isolated world, and he spent me an hour telling me all his views on his isolation, and like, he's like, you know, I've spent a whole year in isolation, and this is what I've come, I don't know how long he kept to himself, but it was just like you could tell. It was like you're talking to somebody who's been all over the state about the problems with other areas of the state. It's like, sir, I can tell you what's wrong with the state, or I can tell you what's wrong. I could tell that guy what's wrong with his area. What's wrong with his area was that there was a freaking storm drain that led directly into someone's basement. I kid you not. This is a fun story to get away from horrible racist stories and being attacked by dogs in people's yards. This was one that was really interesting. This is the one where I talk about where, like, they made a satanic symbol out of, like, piping down below. We found there was a dog corpse. That was another one that was, I mean, like, I guess there had been a wild dog that had moved down there and then it had died, and we found the bones. But anyway, though, so there was a storm drain. Very typical storm drain, like a storm box, actually, the type that empties out into a creek, like, you know, at your local park. So it starts at this park, this little park area. And what you do as a land surveyor is you actually go in there with, like, a flashlight and some tape measure and stuff like that, and you figure out how long is this pipe, how far back does it go, where does it lead to, and you take all your measurements and everything. You find other pipes that lead down, and then you go find the storm drains that lead down to this larger storm box. And so we start going back there in this little area, in this low residential area, and it turns out that apparently somebody's basement got in the way of the storm box, and the engineers in charge just said, you know what? Let's just keep going. So we wound up in somebody's basement. Like, you know, there was a door to get out of the basement, there was a light on the ceiling, and then just a storm box just running right through the middle of it. So we had to actually then measure out these people's basement and then explain to the engineers, and this is another one of those that, like, the engineers didn't believe us. We had to go back and get pictures. They were like, really? Just goes through someone's basement? We were like, yeah, just goes through a basement. And so we took pictures of it, and we were like, here you go. Basement. This is a picture of the corpse, the dog. This is just a weird one. There was also ones where, like, I don't know, it seemed like the construction crews got confused, where they started to, like, lower pipe in, and then something didn't connect, and so they tried to lower more pipe, and then they tried to adjust it, and then it kind of worked, and they were just like, good, get out of here. And so we would have to, like, map those out, and we'd get calls from the engineers on those too. We'd be like, are you sure that this, like, bends backwards in on itself and then flows upward for a little while? and we were like, yeah, it creates a standing pool of water, and then it kind of backs up, the pool of water backs up during the rain, I guess, and then it flows down. So it was like, yeah, this happened. This is sort of like I don't know. It just gives you sort of a more interesting take on the city's infrastructure. It wasn't like that in like better areas. Like if you live in a middle class, upper class areas, it's all fine. Like the upper class areas were just gorgeous. Like you go down there, you have no problems. The engineers would never question anything. All the property pins were nice and straight and beautiful because the place had been surveyed like multiple times. You know, everything was kept all nice and clean. It was just when you went down to the low-income areas, those are where all my craziest stories are at, where like the weirdest stuff happened and the weirdest people approached me. Another low-income story. I remember the time when I was trying to pop open manholes. Manholes! Big pain in the butt to get open. This is one of those, you've actually got to measure out manholes. There's storm drains and there's manholes, and in places, these are illegal now. These are illegal now, I believe, federally speaking, but there are composite drains as well. It used to be that they would have composite drains, and they would accept raw sewage and storm drain, and storm runoff, and it would all just go down to the treatment center. And this was kind of an issue though, because like you would get a whole ton of like extra storm water that would be running into the treatment center, and it would cause a lot of burden on the treatment centers. So they actually outlawed this. You can't do that anymore. They don't have composite pipes, except for in like areas that are really run down where they haven't paid a lot of attention. So if you see a composite pipe, you're really not supposed to have seen the composite pipe, but they are out there. As it is though, there's usually sewage drains, and then there is storm drains. And so the storm drains, you know, they lead out to streams and stuff like that. It's just rainwater runoff. And then the sewage drains are, of course, sewage. And you don't go down into the sewage drains. That would be terrible. You need all sorts of special equipment to do that. So, you know, typically a land surveyor wouldn't bother with that. What instead is we have like these giant extendable poles that will lower down, and we can use those to measure a lot of things. And so we'll see like there's a pipe down there, and you'll tie like a ribbon around the pole. And so you can say like it's probably, like most of the pipes are standard size, so you can say like that's probably about a 6-inch pipe, and so you put it around you put your ribbon around the 6-inch, and you lower it down there, and you see like, does the ribbon come up to the top? Ah, yeah, 6 inches. So that's how you measure out the sewer stuff. But anyway though, so we were measuring those out once. We were measuring out the sewer holes. And one of the things that happens is you get people, and they do the tar and the asphalt to repair the roads, and they just come by and they just lay tar and asphalt over the manholes. So this is fine. I mean, it's like, it would be a real pain in the butt for the guys who do the asphalt to go around the manholes sometimes. So what you have to do is you have to get a sledgehammer, and you come out there and you bang on the manholes until the sledgehammer pops over, until the manhole pops open. Then you get like a sort of a crowbar sort of thing, and you just wedge that, you wedge the sewer pipe, or the manhole, you wedge the manhole off of the pipe, and then you can look down there. And I remember we were doing that, and we had this was like little old men, I don't know what it is, little old guys are just like the people who own the world and want you to know. And so anyway, we were doing this, and we had some little old guy. He stormed out of his house, and he shouted at us. He goes, you know, you stop what you're doing right now. He thought, like, I mean, he probably had to look at me. He thought that I was some kind of like hoodlum. I don't know what the deal was, what he thought was going on with the field manager. But anyway, but I was a hoodlum. So he came out there and he's like, you know, what are you doing out there? Like, you can't, he's like, this is illegal. You can't be messing around with this stuff. And so we were like, well, we're land surveyors, sir. We're trying to measure out these things. You know, we're getting a look at where your, you know, pipe's going. Here's our maps, and here's this is what we're doing. There's our truck. You can see the light bar on the truck. You can see all the equipment. We're wearing like safety gear. And he goes, that's impossible. And we go, why is that impossible, sir? He's like, because I have friends in the city, and I would hear if my region was about to look at the sewer lines. And so he went back inside. He threatened to like call the city, and I guess if he called the city, they would have told him, oh yes, we're having them do land survey. Because that's the thing, is if they were doing like, land survey is preliminary. Like, you might see land surveyors out in your neighborhood, and it doesn't mean they're gonna do anything. What land survey is really for is it's for mapping out the area to determine like how much it's gonna cost to do a project. So if they're gonna tear up all the roads, they kind of look at like what's there presently, how does it look, and so how much is it gonna cost us to redo all this? Like, how much land is out here? So a lot of times you get that. Land surveyors come out and they like do a look, and you say, okay, here's where all the pipes go, here's where everything goes. You know, here's pictures of some of this stuff. It looks okay. We're not going to do anything. So even had this man been like friends with a bunch of people, all he would have found out was like, yeah, we're just doing a preliminary look, and we're assessing how much it would cost to repair the sewer lines, because that's what we were doing. Yeah, sometimes you come out in the middle of construction projects. I remember I went out to a school once, and this was really terrible. Was we did the survey stuff, and then they started digging, and they dug. They just came out there with like a great big, like what is it? not a steam shovel, but you know, the ones that are like steam shovels. And they just scooped up a bunch of the ground, and the whole thing collapsed. And then we had to go out and we had to like do a survey of all the damage. And it was like, here's the collapse, here's the terror that was wrought on all this. Yes. So land survey, fascinating job. Yes, I've been on for a while. I could add more, but I don't believe I've told my most interesting stories. I've told my story about my racist old man, story about my airport work. I don't know. I mean, there's more details that you could go into. I could go into the specifics of how the job is done. It's a fascinating job, but unfortunately, the company I was with began to struggle a bit financially. The housing crisis hit the industry really hard. As far as, like, construction went down, and when construction goes down, land survey goes down. So that was kind of what we were facing, is there was less work to do, there was more competition from companies that were, like larger companies, and that too, we're moving over more to GPS kind of stuff, and so you're starting to see more and more, like, single-man crews out on the field. There are still two-man crews, but it's getting to where you don't need to do them as much. Like a company that can afford to get, like, a really high-end, like, camera that automatically tracks and it'll track, like, reliably. Those jobs can be done by, like, a single man, and so you're starting to get, like, smaller crews. I don't know. It's starting to get tough. It's starting to get competitive. It's becoming a bit less fraternal, unfortunately, which is a little bit sad, but not, not out for the count yet. You've just got fewer old-timey, you've got fewer old-timey surveyors who can navigate by the stars. You still could learn. I believe that my college professor was an old-timey land surveyor, and he liked to teach that kind of stuff. He wanted to teach how to actually navigate and do all the calculus and all this stuff and everything like that. But they're becoming, it's the prior generation, and technology is overtaking that job. It's doing that with a lot of stuff, which is just very strange for a lot of careers. Is it sort of like, what's stable anymore? And it's like, I don't know, anything that can't be automated. Anything that can't be automated or outsourced or whatever. And it's sort of like, I don't know. I don't know what all can't be automated or outsourced anymore. Very tough. Yes, but anyway, that was my time as a land surveyor. That was what it was like. That was some of the stuff that we did. I had a machete. I was very proud of the machete. I actually painted "Fuck You Nature" on the machete, and then sealed it, and it was a really good machete. Actually, it was very reliable. But then I lost it. I was down in like a river, and the river was shallow at the time, so I was like traipsing through the river because, like I said, you just go through the woods, you blaze a trail. Man, I've got more stories. I should do another one of these things. I do have more stories now that I think about it. But anyway, though, lost the machete, fell in the river. So, yes, that'll be it for now. I guess I will catch you guys later.